My name is Magnus, a 43-year-old architect with a knack for designing perfect plans both in my work and in my life. My wife, Elise, 38, is an event planner who has always charmed rooms and commanded attention effortlessly. We've been married for 12 years, a marriage marked by ambitious pursuits and shared triumphs, though not without its cracks. But what marriage isn't a little imperfect? Until this trip, I believed our life together was secure. Sure, there had been arguments, her frustrations with my long hours at work, my quiet resentment over her increasingly busy social life, but I chalked these up to normal marital friction. Elise often joked that I was the least suspicious man alive, and I wore that as a badge of pride. Trust was the cornerstone of our marriage, and until recently, I thought it was mutual. The trip was Elise's idea, a late anniversary celebration at an upscale resort she'd been raving about for months. She'd said it was a chance for us to reconnect, to leave the noise of the city behind and find each other again. Looking back, I should have questioned her enthusiasm. I should have wondered why, after years of letting anniversaries slip by with little fanfare, this one mattered so much. But at the time, I saw it as her way of repairing the distance that had crept into our lives. I was ready to rebuild with her. The resort itself was a paradise, secluded bungalows nestled in lush greenery, endless views of turquoise waters, and every luxury at our fingertips. The first few days were as perfect as the brochures had promised. Elise was radiant, her laughter bubbling like champagne, her energy infectious. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same page again, and I let myself believe this was the fresh start we both needed. But on the fifth day, the foundation began to shift. Elise had taken to filling her days with activities I wasn't part of: sunrise yoga, impromptu spa treatments, long walks to clear her head. It was nothing I hadn't seen before. Elise had always valued her independence. And yet, something about this felt different. She seemed distant, preoccupied. When we were together, her phone buzzed more than usual, and she'd tilt the screen away from me before slipping it back into her bag. I told myself it was work. She was meticulous about staying connected to her clients even on vacation. That evening, as we shared a quiet dinner on the beach, her laughter sounded forced. I asked her if everything was okay, and she assured me it was, brushing my hand with hers and telling me not to worry so much. It was such a small thing, too small to raise alarm on its own, but it planted the first seed of unease. The next morning, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. A note on the nightstand read, "Went for an early swim. See you at breakfast." The message was so innocuous, so Elise, that I felt ridiculous for staring at it too long. But as the morning stretched on and she didn't return, the seed of doubt began to grow. On my way to the pool, I passed a group of staff whispering in the hallway. They stopped when I approached, offering polite but overly familiar smiles, the kind that left me wondering what they weren't saying. At the poolside bar, one of the bartenders asked if I was enjoying my trip, then quickly added, "I'm sure your wife is having a wonderful time," before turning to serve another guest. His tone was pleasant, but something about his words stuck with me. It was the first real crack in the image I'd built of our perfect getaway. Still, I didn't let my suspicions take root fully. Elise had always been outgoing and magnetic, the kind of person who drew attention wherever she went. Of course people noticed her. Of course they talked about her. That didn't mean anything. At least, that's what I told myself. By the fifth night, as Elise became more elusive and the whispers seemed harder to dismiss, the doubts I'd pushed aside began to take hold. The man who never questioned his wife now couldn't stop questioning everything. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. By the sixth day, the gnawing unease had transformed into something sharper, a low hum of suspicion I couldn't silence. Elise's warmth and charm, the very qualities that had made me fall for her, now felt like a mask. I hated myself for thinking it, but the distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It felt deliberate. That morning, she was already gone when I woke up, leaving another note, this one a little too cheerful. "Exploring the island. Don't wait for me. Love you." The words were playful, but they left me cold. Elise wasn't the type to vanish for hours without a plan. And the "love you" at the end? It felt like an afterthought, a token thrown in to keep me from asking questions. At breakfast, the resort staff seemed to know more than they were letting on. I noticed their glances lingering a second too long, the polite smiles laced with something I couldn't quite place. One of the waiters, young, overly friendly, asked if my wife was enjoying her time. I told him she was out exploring, and he smiled knowingly. She must love the private trails, he said. Very peaceful, perfect for meeting people. Meeting people. The words hung in the air, and I felt my chest tighten. Was that an innocent remark? Or was there something more behind it? I spent the morning pacing the resort grounds, pretending to be absorbed in my phone while scanning the crowd for her. Each passing moment only made my thoughts darker. Was she with someone? Or was this all in my head? I told myself I was being irrational, but the doubts clung to me like a second skin. Around noon, I spotted her near the pool. She was laughing, leaning against the edge, her sunglasses hiding her eyes. But she wasn't alone. A man stood nearby, his tanned arms resting casually on the pool ledge as he spoke to her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who radiated easy confidence. I couldn't hear their conversation over the noise of splashing water and distant music, but their body language told a story I didn't want to read. She spotted me before I could approach. Her smile faltered for a split second, so brief I almost missed it, before she waved me over with the same effortless charm she showed everyone. Magnus, she called, her voice bright. I was just meeting Victor. He's here for a work retreat. Victor. He turned to greet me, extending a hand with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Nice to meet you, he said, his grip firm. Your wife has been telling me all about your architecture work. Impressive stuff. I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. There was nothing overtly wrong about the situation. Two strangers chatting at a resort pool. And yet, the way Victor stood just a little too close, the ease with which Elise talked to him, made my blood run cold. It was the kind of connection that felt rehearsed, familiar, too familiar. Elise's phone buzzed on the poolside table, breaking the moment. She grabbed it quickly, glancing at the screen before flipping it face down. Work email, she said breezily, as if I'd asked. Nothing urgent. I excused myself, claiming I needed to check in on a project back home. Elise didn't protest, didn't ask me to stay. Instead, she turned back to Victor, who was now casually leaning against the edge of the pool, his attention locked on her. Back in our bungalow, I paced the room, running my hands through my hair as I tried to make sense of everything. This was Elise, my wife, the woman I'd built my life with. She couldn't possibly be no. I wouldn't let myself finish the thought. There had to be an explanation for her behavior, for Victor, for all of it. But deep down, I knew the truth wasn't something I was ready to face. That evening, Elise suggested we join a group dinner at the resort's beachfront restaurant. She seemed eager, more so than usual, her laughter spilling out too freely as she chattered about the island's beauty and the incredible food. I played along, smiling at her anecdotes, but my mind was elsewhere. Victor was there, seated at the far end of the long table, but his gaze kept wandering to Elise. And hers? It darted to him more than once, fleeting but undeniable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I felt the tension grow unbearable. Elise was hiding something, I was sure of it now. But confronting her without proof felt like stepping onto thin ice. I had to be certain before I shattered the fragile calm that remained between us. That night, as she slipped into bed beside me, her perfume lingering in the air, I watched her in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. She closed her eyes quickly, as though avoiding mine. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the waves outside, doing nothing to soothe the storm raging inside me. The Elise I thought I knew was slipping away, and the woman in her place was a stranger. By the seventh day, the pieces were falling into place, and they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Elise's behavior had gone from puzzling to damning, and though I clung to a shred of hope that I was wrong, the mounting evidence whispered otherwise. It started that morning when I decided to follow her discreetly as she slipped out of the bungalow before sunrise. She hadn't left a note this time, which only deepened my suspicions. I trailed her at a distance, keeping to the shadows as she wandered along the resort's winding paths. She wasn't heading to the yoga pavilion or the beach like she usually did. Instead, she walked toward the secluded cliffside villas, a part of the resort I hadn't seen her visit before. I stopped short as she approached one of the villas and glanced around nervously before disappearing inside. My heart sank. There was no plausible reason for her to be there alone, or so I thought. Determined to keep my cool, I returned to the bungalow and waited. When Elise came back an hour later, she was flushed and bright-eyed, her hair slightly damp, as if she'd showered. "Morning swim," she explained with a wide smile, slipping into the bathroom before I could ask anything more. I nodded, hiding my mounting frustration. The timeline didn't add up. That evening, as Elise got ready for dinner, her phone buzzed on the bedside table. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but this time something caught my eye. A notification flashed briefly before disappearing, but not before I caught the name. Victor. My blood ran cold. I waited until Elise stepped into the bathroom before I reached for the phone. She'd always been open with her devices, but this time, it required a passcode I didn't know. She'd changed it. My hands shook as I put the phone back, careful to leave it exactly where I'd found it. That was the moment I knew. Elise wasn't just acting differently. She was hiding something from me. Later that night, I decided to do some digging. I made my way to the resort's main building, claiming I needed assistance with our dinner reservations. As the receptionist pulled up our details, I casually asked about the cliffside villas, mentioning that Elise and I had discussed upgrading for the last few days of our stay. "Oh, those are private rentals," she said brightly. "We don't manage them directly. Guests have to book them through the villa owners." My stomach twisted. Private rentals. That meant there was no record of who she'd met there or why. Desperate for answers, I wandered to the villa she had entered earlier that morning. It was dark now, its curtains drawn, but I noticed a faint glow coming from the second-floor balcony. I crept closer, staying out of sight, and spotted something that made my heart stop. Resting on the balcony railing was a familiar scarf, Elise's scarf. I'd bought it for her on a trip to Paris, and she rarely left the bungalow without it. But why was it here? The next morning, Elise announced she was heading to a guided nature walk and suggested I join a snorkeling excursion in the meantime. Her suggestion felt rehearsed, almost like a distraction. I agreed, feigning interest, but as soon as she left, I followed her again. This time, she led me to a different villa, where Victor was waiting on the porch. I ducked behind a cluster of palm trees, my pulse pounding in my ears, as I watched them exchange a warm embrace before stepping inside. I was paralyzed, unsure of what to do. Confronting her in the moment felt reckless, and yet the weight of her betrayal was unbearable. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Had she planned the trip with him in mind? Was this why she'd insisted we come here? That evening, I noticed something else, something small but telling. Elise's jewelry box, a compact leather case she always traveled with, was missing one piece. The bracelet I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. She'd worn it religiously every trip we'd taken together, but now it was nowhere to be found. I searched the bungalow, hoping to find it misplaced, but it was gone. Later, during dinner, she reached in her bag and pulled out her phone. For a brief second, I saw the bracelet in the bottom of the bag before she quickly zipped it shut. The final blow came when I found the matchbook. It was tucked into her suitcase, likely overlooked in her hurry to pack. It wasn't from the resort. It was from a bar downtown, one we hadn't visited together. The name printed on the matchbook meant nothing to me, but scrawled inside the cover was a note. "Meet at 8. Meet at 8. My hands trembled as I stared at the note, the evidence undeniable now. Elise had secrets that didn't include me. I spent the rest of the evening replaying everything I'd seen and heard, every sign I'd ignored. Elise had always been good at masking her emotions, but the cracks in her facade were now gaping holes. And for the first time, I wasn't just suspicious. I was almost certain. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was cheating on me. But I needed proof. Real proof. Something she couldn't explain away or dismiss. And I was willing to go to any lengths to find it. By the 8th day, I was no longer a man grappling with suspicion. I was a man armed with undeniable proof. The love and trust I'd once felt for Elise were buried under a mountain of betrayal, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. My wife had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined, and I was done playing the oblivious husband. I spent the morning carefully compiling everything I'd uncovered. The messages, the photos, the villa receipts. All of it was meticulously saved to a folder on my laptop and backed up on a flash drive. I labeled the folder simply, Elise Evidence. Every detail of her affair with Victor was there, laid out like a case file for my lawyer. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had everything in place to ensure she couldn't worm her way out of the consequences. After slipping the flash drive into my pocket, I made a call to the lawyer I'd used for a business dispute years ago. Philip was sharp, ruthless, and exactly who I needed. I explained the situation in brief, my voice calm despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. "I have proof," I said, my tone flat. "Photos, messages, financial records. I'll send you everything." Philip didn't hesitate. "Send it over. We'll draft the divorce papers and include a full financial claim. I'll make sure she's left with as little as legally possible." "That's exactly what I want," I replied. The next step was the accounts. Elise and I had several joint accounts, most of which I managed. She rarely paid attention to them, trusting me to handle the finances. I logged in, heart pounding, and began transferring funds. Every cent from the joint accounts moved into my private account, one she had no access to. Next, I accessed her personal savings account. Elise had once shared her login details with me for convenience, and she'd never thought to change them. I was methodical, transferring small amounts in multiple transactions to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Within an hour, I'd drained the account completely. Her personal savings, our shared funds, everything was now under my control. I left just enough to cover any automatic payments that might raise suspicion, but ensured she wouldn't have access to significant resources. With the finances handled, I called the airline and rescheduled my flight home, ensuring Elise wouldn't have access to my ticket. Then, I contacted the resort concierge, requesting a private car to the airport for early the next morning. Elise would wake to find me gone. In the afternoon, I returned to Victor's villa one last time. I needed to be sure I hadn't missed anything. Peering through the gap in the curtains, I saw them again, laughing over glasses of wine on the balcony. They looked so comfortable, so at ease, like a couple basking in the glow of a shared secret. My stomach churned, but I swallowed the anger. I took a few more photos with my phone, zooming in to capture their faces clearly. This wasn't just about proving her infidelity. It was about ensuring she couldn't spin this into anything other than what it was. That evening, I sat across from Elise at dinner, watching her with a new clarity. She talked about the beauty of the resort, the wonderful people she'd met, and how much she would miss this place. It was all a performance, every word a lie. But I played my part, nodding and smiling as if I were still the gullible husband she thought I was. When we returned to the bungalow, she kissed me lightly on the cheek and disappeared into the bathroom to shower. I used the opportunity to check her suitcase. Tucked into a side pocket, I found the bracelet I'd noticed missing earlier and the matchbook with Victor's note. They were the final pieces of the puzzle, and I photographed them before carefully putting everything back in its place. I emailed Philip the files that night, attaching every photo, screenshot, and detail I'd gathered. My message was simple: here's everything. Make sure she gets what she deserves. As I prepared to leave, I packed lightly, taking only the essentials. I left Elise's belongings untouched, ensuring she wouldn't suspect a thing when she woke up. The folder of evidence remained locked in my laptop, but I kept the flash drive with me as a backup. By the time I finished, the first light of dawn was creeping through the curtains. Before slipping out of the bungalow, I left a note on the bedside table. Elise had to leave early for a work emergency. "We'll talk when you get home." It was a lie, but it would buy me time. She'd be stranded without access to her accounts, unable to book a flight or even pay for a cab. The resort might extend her stay out of courtesy, but she'd have to scramble to figure out her next steps. And when she finally made it home, the divorce papers and the evidence would be waiting. As I stepped into the waiting car, I felt an odd sense of relief. Elise had taken everything I'd believed in and twisted it into a lie, but now I was reclaiming control. She thought she was untouchable, But she was about to learn how wrong she was. And this time, there would be no escaping the truth. Returning home without Elise felt surreal. The house that once symbolized partnership now seemed hollow, a mausoleum for a marriage she had destroyed. But I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to finish what she started, to dismantle her life as ruthlessly as she had dismantled my trust. The first step was simple, ensuring Elise felt the full weight of her betrayal. I contacted Philip immediately upon landing, confirming that he had everything he needed to proceed. Move forward with the divorce filing, I instructed. But I want the papers served in a way she'll never forget. Philip chuckled darkly. Consider it done. While waiting for the legal machinery to churn, I set my revenge into motion. Elise thrived on appearances. Her reputation was her most prized possession. She was the social butterfly who basked in admiration, the charming wife with the perfect life. I planned to strip all of that away. The social fallout. Elise had curated a pristine public image on social media, where her posts painted the picture of an idyllic life and a devoted marriage. I hacked into her accounts. She'd foolishly saved the passwords on our shared laptop and replaced her polished facade with the truth. I uploaded the photos and videos of her with Victor, paired with timestamps from our anniversary trip. The captions were brutal but honest. The truth behind the lies. This is the woman who destroyed a 12-year marriage for a fling. I disabled comments, forcing her friends, colleagues, and family to witness the evidence in silence. To ensure maximum exposure, I sent the post to her closest contacts via direct messages. Her parents, her siblings, her boss, even the extended network of friends who worshipped her. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from mutual friends, some horrified, others offering their support. I ignored them all. My focus was on Elise. Financial collapse. By the time Elise realized what had happened, she would already be trapped. The money I had moved from our accounts was now safely in a trust under my control. Without access to funds, she wouldn't just struggle to return home. She'd struggle to maintain the lifestyle she had always taken for granted. But I didn't stop there. I canceled every shared service, her credit cards, the car insurance, even the utilities in the house. When she finally made it back, she'd find herself in a dark, powerless home with nothing to her name. I even contacted her employer. Armed with the photos and evidence of her affair, I submitted an anonymous tip to the HR department, attaching the documentation that showed how she had misused company time and resources to carry out her affair. Elise had always been a star at work, but her reputation wouldn't survive this scandal. A public service. I didn't want her affair partner, Victor, to escape unscathed. Using the information I'd gathered about him, his villa rental details, his workplace, even his own social media, I crafted an anonymous email campaign. Every photo, every message, every trace of their betrayal went to his company, his family, and his friends. Victor's wife, as it turned out, was the perfect ally. When she received my email, she responded within minutes, thanking me for exposing the truth. He's going to regret this, she wrote. I didn't ask what she planned to do, but I knew Victor's world was about to implode. With Elise cornered financially, socially, and professionally, the final blow was delivering the divorce papers. Philip had arranged for them to be served to her at the airport when she finally managed to fly home. She'd barely stepped off the plane, disheveled and weary, when a process server handed her the thick envelope. The look on her face must have been priceless. The papers included every piece of evidence of her infidelity, laid out with brutal precision. Alongside them was a detailed summary of the financial and legal actions already in place, ensuring she understood the magnitude of her loss. There would be no negotiation, no reconciliation. She was finished. The aftermath. I didn't wait for her to return to the house. By the time she arrived, I was gone, having moved into a temporary apartment while I finalized my plans to sell the property. Her key no longer worked, and a note taped to the door read, "Contact my lawyer. You're no longer welcome here." Over the next few days, her frantic messages flooded my phone. I didn't bother reading most of them, but one stood out. "Magnus, please. We can fix this. I'll do anything." Anything? Where was that desperation when she was sneaking off to villas with Victor? I blocked her number without replying. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned of her downfall. Her boss had placed her on administrative leave, pending an investigation, and her family had distanced themselves in shame. She moved into a dingy apartment downtown. Relying on the scraps of goodwill she could muster from friends who hadn't abandoned her entirely. But even they grew tired of her constant pleas for sympathy. Victor, predictably, had disappeared the moment things went south. His own life was in shambles thanks to his enraged wife, who had filed for divorce and taken him to the cleaners. Karma had a way of catching up. For the first time in years, I felt free. Elise had turned our life into a lie, but now I was the one writing the ending. There was no guilt, no second-guessing, only the satisfaction of knowing she would spend the rest of her life regretting the choices that had cost her everything. As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I raised a glass of whiskey to the future. Elise had thought she could destroy me and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. Revenge wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming the life she had tried to take from me. And now it was mine again.